Sometimes I think I have a great sense of timing. Just the first week of 2018, I decided I was going to dive into the Netflix Voltron series because it seemed like something that I would enjoy, despite the fandom horror stories. Now, in the final month of the year, the series has come to a close with its 8th and final season. So, over the course of the past year, I've been sporadically exposing myself to the show in short bursts, and as the series and the year are coming to a close, I thought it was the perfect time to let out what I wanted to get out about it in a very long talk about Voltron, Legendary Defender. Just because I have a lot of stuff to talk about, this is going to be a series of videos, taking the show in 26 episode bits. So 3 videos that still have a lot of elements to all of them. All that is going into this is going to range from objective observations to very subjective opinions. I will spew a lot of feelings and some rantings, and hopefully some part of each video will contain a bit of an organized review. No guarantees, but this is the Spam channel, and I figured I'd try. Wait, have I ever talked about a show on this channel that wasn't anime before? Well, there's a first for everything, so let's start. Obligatory spoiler alert. I will be talking about pretty much every facet of this show in depth, so for some reason, if you have a problem knowing almost everything that goes on in this show, I suggest you not bother watching this. Got it? I did it, now nobody can complain. Oh, wait. First off, I have to start with a clean confession here. Disclaimer, I have next to no knowledge about the 1984-85 half-anime series that this reboot is based off of. I plan to avoid comparing the two of them as much as possible. Without any expertise on the source material, comparisons would be sloppy at best, and I am not going to pretend that I know more than I do just to sound smart. From what I can recall, Voltron Legendary Defender was overwhelmingly accepted by old and new fans when it debuted on Netflix back in 2016. At least the internet wasn't blowing up about it the same way it has with some more recently reappropriated 80s cartoon properties. Something like Thundercats I'm pretty well acquainted with, so I can say a thing or two about how awesome its 2011 reboot was, and from memory of 2.5 years ago, it seems new Voltron falls closer to that on the reboot spectrum than, say, She-Ra. I would like some more informed opinions on that, though, because I'm just here for Legendary Defender. Anyone with a better memory or insight into the original Japanimation is welcome to correct me on things regarding it. I'm just going to stick to what I know or have been told by friends. Speaking of whom, I also have to thank my friend Chase right from the get-go for going through this show with me and sparking some interesting conversations that have lent themselves a lot to this long talk. He also gave me most of the ideas for the title cards, and I have to give credit where credit is due, so you'll hear me mention him a few times throughout this. Thanks again, Chase! Now, without further ado, let's talk about Voltron. As a general rule, I'd say Voltron Legendary Defender got off to a great start. Overall, the animation is solid, both in the 2D characters and the 3D mechs and ships and space battles. Furthermore, the combining of the two styles is almost seamless, and I think that is a great thing. I really like it. The opening theme is a lyricless, minute-long sequence of action shots, and while it's great, I guess some people could find it boring after the 10th time or so that's why Netflix has the skip intro option. I don't generally use that option myself. The music of the series is good for setting the moods, which can range from stark serious to good, clean, hilarious fun. The main characters all distinctly have their own personalities, and show plenty of room for development, though in Season 1 we are given a little bit of growth for some of them early enough so that it doesn't feel like we have to wait forever for it to happen. Season 1 is basically a big introduction to all of it. The characters, the story, the world and universe it takes place in, the size and scale of it all. We meet Voltron and its paladins, we establish what they have been called to do, see several small conflicts to set up the universal threat that is Zarkon's empire, and that Voltron is in fact the only force that can feasibly stand up against it. We get to see a show about action and adventure in the vast expanse of space far beyond human imagination. So the first 13, or 11, depending on how you slice it, episodes are a concrete foundation for bigger and better adventures to be had later. It gives the audience a lot to look at and explore without being overwhelming and sets up enough free space for the series to explore further over the course of a longer-running show. Though sometimes the things they do give us beg difficult questions like, how long is the average Galra lifespan anyway? But I digress. The basic story of Season 1 of Legendary Defender is that 5 humans find themselves in outer space and wind up driving what can be called the most powerful weapon in the universe, Voltron, a giant robot humanoid made up of 5 smaller lion robots. Despite the fact that not all of them are keen on sticking around to fight a tyrannical race of purple Thundercats light years away from Earth, they do manage to get over their differences and form the Defender of the Universe, a title which is in fact a callback to the original show. Let's talk a bit about our 5 paladins, that is the Lion Pilots. Takeshi Shirogane, aka Shiro, aka Space Dad. Shiro is the de facto leader of the Paladins. The first scene of the show is him and 2 crew members on a deep space mission being abducted by the Galra, and it's Shiro's miraculous escape from... Wait, is that a Mandalorian symbol? Did the Mandalorians move over to Voltron after Disney retconned their societal structure? Anyway, Shiro escaped from the Galra somehow, and him getting back to Earth is what triggers the locating of the first lion, the blue one, and consequently getting the others roped into a very long space journey. Shiro was a great pilot and a leader from his time in this Garrison Worldwide Army Force thing on Earth, and every one of the others who ended up becoming a paladin automatically sees him as such. Now, it was a year in Earth's time that Shiro was in the hands of the Galra, and among other things, he was forced to fight in an alien gladiator ring and had his arm removed, I think. All indication here is that the space magicians known as the Druids just took his arm off of him one day and replaced it with a souped-up Galra cyborg arm. If he lost it in the gladiator ring or was permanently damaged in a prior escape attempt, it is never said. Also, I have to assume that Shiro's experience in space only amounted to about the time equivalent to that of 1 Earth year, because intergalactic time zones must have been a pain to factor in Season 1 anyway! What this all boils down to is Shiro is automatically the leader of the Lions because of his prior experience both being in charge of people and being a prisoner of the Galra, the latter of which has left some rather prevalent trauma scars, but he does his best to lead anyway. Shiro is likable and, as aforementioned, frequently acts in a rather paternal way towards these other pilots, who are all teenagers, and he knows they are going to need guidance. He's a giving guy with the best interests of the universe at heart, a fan-favorite character right from the get-go. Next, I guess we'll go right arm. Keith, whose hair is definitely not a mullet, is the paladin of the Red Lion. Now, Season 1 Keith is little less than annoying. His character is marked by an emo, lone wolf nature, and is constantly butting heads with Lance, who we'll get to in a minute. He's not afraid to take risks, does anything he can by himself if possible, and is willing to sacrifice a few for the sake of the many. He's clearly gifted in the ways of piloting ships and combat, and despite being the so-called emo lone wolf, he follows orders pretty well, especially when those orders are coming from Shiro. Other than that, there's not a lot to say about Keith at the start, and the fact that, rewatching the first season, we can clearly see the groundwork for plot points that will be important to developing his character later on is a good thing. Things like implying that he has a particularly important connection to Shiro, and this knife, which has been there since episode 1, are clear indicators of the plans the writers had for him from the get-go, and plans are good to see, especially in reboots. The Blue Lion Paladin is this kid named Lance. Lance is the funny dummy of the group. He's the kind of guy who you look at and say, look at how he draws attention to himself, he's gotta be insecure. And wouldn't you know it, he kind of is. Lance is well-meaning, and always is looking to prove himself in one way or another, even if it means forging a rivalry with Keith from scratch. No, really, it's entirely one-sided until Lance just doesn't put it down and Keith picks it up. Lance is flirty and laid back most of the time, and it takes a few episodes for him to become a wholly dependable team member with how hard he tries to show off. Like, Lance, no, they told you no kicking, you need to work together on this. However, it's not as though his projected confidence is misplaced. At his core, he's just as competent as the other paladins. Though he comes across as a goofball at first, and don't get me wrong, that is a significant part of his character. He's incredibly relatable and has a lot of heart. It took me a bit too much time to be able to finally say that out loud, though, because honestly, I didn't really appreciate or particularly care for Lance at the first time around. I guess he's the kind of character that just grows on you. Isn't that right, Keith? Hopping across to the other leg, we have Hunk, the Yellow Lion Paladin. Now, Hunk is funny and smart. His thing back in the garrison was that he was training to become an engineer. So, he's the only one in the group who can kind of understand what Pidge is saying when talking about technology, but not too much. Hunk is very likable and very honest, but tries to be in a way that doesn't hurt anybody's feelings. He also likes his food. He's very good with food and with cooking, and can salvage a meal from pretty much anything they manage to find in space, which is a sign that he is super resourceful. Less so at the very start, Hunk becomes one of the characters that holds the team together. He's kind of prone to spur-of-the-moment freaking out when something suddenly happens, and let's not forget the motion sickness. When the story begins, Hunk is scared of being out in space so far from Earth. He thinks the Voltron thing was fun and cool, but when given the chance, he admits that he'd rather go back home than stick around in the middle of an intergalactic conflict with the fate of the universe on his shoulders. He understandably has some reservations about this, but after about the halfway point of the season, when they save the Balmera and its people, he steels himself for the journey ahead. He's seen what it is that the Galra have been doing to the places they conquer, and he has to put his foot down. Or the foot down. He doesn't stop being scared, this is something that remains, but after this turning point, he's determined to stick with the team and liberate the universe from Zarkon's hold. It's a small but important change. Just like Hunk is a lesser appreciated but no doubt important character. I think everyone needs to appreciate Hunk more. Then finally we get to Pidge, the reverse trap. Another something that I do know for sure regarding the old series is that all of the starting paladins of Voltron were boys, including Pidge. But one major thing they adjusted to Legendary Defender was making Pidge a girl. Surprisingly, I'm not aware of any fan outcry against this particular decision, and I can think of a few reasons. The one that comes to mind immediately is, this was a secret. It wasn't something they advertised, it was a thing people found out as they watched the show, and as they watched it, they got the well thought out and relevant backstory for the character that described why it was she was disguising herself as a boy for the first little while. It worked! Pidge is a girl in this version, and it works all the way through for the character and the story. It was handled well and received well. She also gets her own little team-building character arc in Season 1, which is important to note. Another case like Hunk, but this actually came to a conclusion first. Pidge isn't keen on being stuck as part of the Voltron team at first, but for different reasons. Her father and brother were the other crew members abducted by the Galra on Shiro's space mission at the very start of the series. Pidge wants to find them. That is the first and foremost important thing at the front of her mind, and it is the cause of some real tension among the team. But then, push came to shove, and after Mission Impossible Katie Holt edition, she proudly proclaims herself a paladin of Voltron, and sticks with the rest of the team as her new priority. Now again, we see consistently throughout later episodes and seasons that she doesn't forget her initial motivation. She still wants to find her family, but it takes just a slight backseat to protecting the rest of the universe, and she doesn't go off on her own for extended periods of time, making it hard for Voltron to be completed when they need it. Pidge is best girl. She's also the techno geek that keeps everyone more or less in tune with what's going on as far as sci-fi stuff goes. Now, the other important team members that we all need to remember are the all-important Alteans the paladins are brought to meet by the Blue Lion. Princess Allura and her attendant Koran. A few quick notes about them. Altea is gone, like blown up, it doesn't exist anymore. They have been in hypersleep for 10,000 years, and in that time, Emperor Zarkon has just been ruining everything for everyone. These two, particularly Allura, have a lot to adjust to, but they are not deterred. She is positive that what they have to do is get it back together and be the ones to save the universe from the not Mandalorians. There's that symbol again, I don't get it. Allura, the first few episodes, kind of needs to loosen up a bit, but it's not something that you can blame her for, given the situation they're in. Between learning that the only way she has any connection to her homeworld is through a holographic projection of her father via his memories in the castle, and having to scrounge together this new paladin team, get them all working together and stay together, it makes sense that she'd be stressed out. She has to help save the universe, and it's something the Paladins definitely cannot do without her, specifically because for some reason she has a lot of fancy Altean powers, like being the source of generating wormholes for their castle ship to portal through space through quickly, that Koran just can't do. Speaking of Koran, he is the most comic relief character of the bunch. This doesn't make him unimportant. Koran is the local encyclopedia of potentially useless alien knowledge, and when someone has a question about something, he generally has an idea of an answer to give. He's also the character the others rely on for spontaneous emotional support, like the scene where Lance is talking about his homesickness. He's incredibly helpful, but how helpful he is happens to be in almost direct proportion to how many jokes he's involved in. There is rarely a scene in this show where Koran is on screen and it can be taken 100% seriously. He is, by definition, the quintessential side character. On a last note, let's just point out that Allura does not do subtlety. Right from the get-go, she just gawks at Lance's ears and calls them ugly first thing after waking up from 10,000 years of sleep, and it doesn't stop there. Now, quick notes about the villains. The Galra Empire is the big bad here. The conflict is very simple, and Emperor Zarkon is at the top. The thing is, for pretty much the whole first season, Zarkon is more or less an enigmatic shadow, menacingly standing atop a long staircase that we are magically walking backwards from, even though we are trying to get to the top. Okay, so maybe not that much, but you get what I'm trying to say here. Zarkon gives orders, and we see him doing very little for the first bit. From what we are shown in Season 1, Hagar, the witch, and his generals are doing most of the things in terms of conflict with Voltron. Zarkon gives some orders, and we see secondhand what he's done to the star systems with his power, but it's not until the very end that we are given the honor of seeing him personally take action against Voltron, and it is a sight to see. But again, it just takes a little while to get there. In the meantime, here, have Sendak and Haxus and this guy and that guy and these row beasts Hagar put together to try and beat Voltron but completely failed. They're interesting enough. It's not like the battles are just about who can yell the loudest, but when you're given the idea that you have this actual big bad guy out there waiting to show up and show off some awesomely terrifying stuff, you kind of want to see that. Zarkon has a lot of lackeys, again sending out orders, but when he shows up personally, you know stuff is about to happen. That's how this is supposed to be set up. Zarkon should be hype, but is he? That's something I'm trying to figure out here. Now that's the rundown. As far as review goes, I said at the start, this season is solid. This is the part where I just point out details I took in, for better or for worse, because why are we saying that Zarkon has been terrorizing and conquering the universe for 10,000 years? We know that they have an almost universal alien near equivalent to these measurements of time, but they mention it in years specifically, and that bothers me. Speaking of which, again, not all star systems work the same way in terms of how they measure time. Not even planets in the same solar system have the same measurements of time. Who's to say that 10,000 years for this Altean ship to be in stasis wasn't 100 million years on some planet somewhere else? Does it feel like just a century or so for Zarkon? For all we know, some planet out there is just having a really terrible weekend with these Galra folks. How long does the average Galran live anyway? Also, all aliens speak English. They have occasional alien terminology mixed in and written languages, but we all understand each other perfectly on the basic level for communication. Also, we have Allura reviving a Balmera while it is dying. Now this thing is desolate. It was when they first found it. They just took the last viable crystal of life force that we know of from its body. Somehow, Allura, using that crystal, revives the whole darn thing, and all of the other life crystals start growing back. Most of them are tiny, luckily. Last I checked, that's not how energy worked, though. I know this. I know Allura Ex Machina is a thing, and it will continue to be a thing, and this space magic is just combined with Voltron's equivalent to the Force, but I am at odds with how we managed to multiply the energy output. That's not possible, and it bugs me. Is it the help from the Balmerans? How much of their energy was used here? They said trying to do it could possibly, kill Allura. This is ridiculous. And when the Balmera crystallizes the Row Beast afterward, you know the Row Beast that Voltron couldn't defeat? The crystal that they trapped this thing in is way bigger than the one they hauled onto the ship that they've been using as a basis for reviving this thing. Speaking of which, Alteans have chameleon powers. Now this is a cool thing, good for diplomacy, like they say, but not only does Allura grow bigger, she kind of has super strength now, and I want to know where that came from. Does increasing her size make her stronger? Last I checked, that's not how chameleons work. But chameleons can't size shift, so I'm gonna go ahead and say that that analogy ends there. But if you're just trying to blend in with the native species for diplomatic reasons, I'd expect the size difference to have a discrepancy with how strong she actually is in proportion to it, you know? Like, it's kind of a facade, like the Titans in Attack on Titan. It's just magic, right? Or maybe she could bench press a smart card before Season 1, and it's just too early for her in the series to be beating up on the Paladins via girl power. Oh, I bet that this little side quest with Shiro here is where the ship of him and Allura came from. Yeah, that was a thing. Team Mom and Team Dad logic? I don't know, because I don't think Allura is Team Mom material, personally. She's more like that older sibling who says, Mom's not home, so I'm in charge. Let's face it, we all do it. Where does Pidge keep the glasses when she's wearing her helmet? And how come the Galra aren't already attacking Earth? They kind of just left in Episode 1 after the Blue Lion wasn't on Earth anymore, which makes sense, but hear me out. I just want to know why. This is not the first time the Galra has come to the solar system that we've seen. The first time we've seen was when they abducted Shiro and the Holtz from this moon of Pluto, and then they left. My question is, were they exploring the system? Were they looking for Voltron? They didn't find it. They just found these little people on some moon. Why did they leave? You mean that they weren't at all curious about where the humans came from? Or wanted to see the planet they came from as a potential target for conquest? Is this just another Galra don't view time in the same way humans do thing? Like, meh, we'll be back later. There aren't a lot of places they haven't conquered by the looks of it. so it doesn't make sense. Like, the second time, hey, Voltron isn't there anymore, let's just ignore this podunk rock of a planet in the boonies, we have bigger issues at hand. Kind of makes sense, but the Galra Empire is huge, so like, while everybody else is looking for Voltron, now that it's getting back together, why not send someone like Sendak after Earth in the meantime? They definitely aren't prepared to be occupied by the Purple Thundercats. It doesn't make sense to me. The Voltron transformation sequence is gratuitously epic, and I love it. The accompanying music is hype. In the second episode, or fourth, depending on how you slice it, when the Paladins are trying to figure out the secret of teamwork in forming Voltron, Shiro makes a callback to the original Voltron battle cry. As of Season 1, the Paladins are properly color-coded to their lines, which apparently they weren't in the original, or at least not what was reported by my friend. This is good for OCD. I don't know where the exclamation, "Holy Crow," comes from, but I like it. Allura is Cinderella, and she has these nosy mice that will snitch to her about everybody's secrets, and I feel they are totally underutilized. Also, they sleep in her jewelry box, and that's cute. I like how the aliens in this series are, even from one species to another, varied. Like, even individuals among these species, there are various different designs for them. Like, you can see there are actually worlds and cultures for them that, admittedly, we don't get to see and explore as much as some people might want to, but that's not the focus of it, so that's okay. I mean, just look at the Galra. The sentries are robot foot soldiers that all obviously look exactly the same, but you can tell them apart from the flesh and blood soldiers. And they're all uniquely designed. Like, if you wanted to, you could learn a lot of them, most of them I'd say, by name, and how to tell them apart, which I can appreciate because despite the victory or death hive mentality that they all have, each one of them has their own design and personalities and even their own agendas for how they're gonna move up in the system. Let's point out that even the Paladins and their lions have different ways of fighting. Most notably, Hunk, never uses weapons equipped to his lion here. At least not in the first season. He just kind of throws its weight around, and I find that funny. There are a few things that I liked about the Haunted Castle episode. On the detail side, there's this part where Pidge and Hunk get stuck in zero gravity, and how they move around is accurate to how you would or would not be able to move around in zero gravity. On a character note, this episode is good for when Allura has to make an important decision to sacrifice King Alfor's memories in the castle for the sake of the team and likewise the universe as a whole. It's a really sad and touching moment when all of these memories go flying past her and she has to give up her last true connection to the home she loved so much. Besides the castle, Ankaran. It pains her, but she has to do what's right, and it is a boon to her character. Bye, King Alfor. See you in the final season. Speaking of Allura, when she's captured by the Galra, she changes back to her regular Altean form, and the Galra armor she was wearing is now way too big for her. Points for consistency. When Zarkon actually goes out to fight, he does so without a helmet on, in space, single-handedly fighting off Keith in the Red Lion. Now that Zarkon is actually doing something, we get a sense of what he's capable of, and it is legit. Speaking of Zarkon, he's the original Paladin of the Black Lion, which is a great plot twist. Allura already knew this, by the way, and he still has the Black Bayard. Bayards are special keys the Paladins have that form specific weapons for their wielders, and when used in these special key ports in the lines, they help equip new weapons and stuff to Voltron. The conflict between Shiro and Zarkon over who is the true Black Lion Paladin comes to a head in the next season, and it's a big driving force for the show there. Speaking of Shiro, the constant reminders of the trauma he's endured when captured by the Galra is a nice touch, reminding us that it's not something easily gotten over. To the point where he's actually gotten so scared that he let an important prisoner go. Bye, Sendak, see you in the Lotar part. Quintessence, Quintessence, Quintessence! We'll talk about Quintessence later. This first season overview has gone on for long enough.
You could never take my place as the head of Voltron!
Moving into Season 2, it is a mostly successful follow-up to the first one, picking up immediately where we left off. Once again, no problems with the animation, sound, or general plot. Also, the voice acting has been consistent in case anybody was wondering. Okay, so I do have one major gripe with the plot of this season, but we'll get to that in a little bit. The most important parts of Season 2 are learning that Keith is part Galra, and Zarkon still has a strong connection to the Black Lion. The first point is part of the series starting to shift its focus onto Keith in general. Now we get some actual time to spend with the character, learn more about him, and see how he's going to grow. The premiere of Season 2 better establishes the pre-existing relationship between Shiro and Keith, as they ended up on the same general location when the lions got separated via a faulty wormhole. These two are like brothers. When Keith didn't have a role model in his life, Shiro showed up, and the two of them are very close. Shiro had been injured by Hagar, both physically and psychologically, in the last season, and in the follow-up, we get a scene where the down-and-out Shiro confides in Keith saying, "If anything happens to me, I want you to be the one to lead Voltron." To which Keith responds, "Ha ha, you're funny, Shiro, don't you dare act like you're gonna die." Keith really doesn't like any of the implications Shiro puts out there, but considering Keith saved Shiro not an hour earlier by piloting the Black Lion, the audience can get a feel for where this is gonna go. The foreshadowing is real, and it is obvious. Keith learning more about his identity becomes a major point to his character, similar to how Pidge continues to search for her family. When we meet the Blade of Marmora, this comes to a head. The Blade is a faction of Galra spies who infiltrate and work against Zarkon's empire. They are a very small group, but potentially indispensable allies, so despite misgivings by some people about where their loyalties lie, an effort is made to get them to work with Voltron. Before we even know who they are, the Blade has proven to have saved their skins on at least 2 occasions. First, being Shiro's miraculous escape from the Galra and return to Earth, something which would have been in my gripes about Season 1 because the explanation they gave was incomplete and unbelievable, but since they fixed it, I figured I'll give it a pass. And the second being this hit on Zarkon's ship that allowed Voltron to wormhole away from his home base after saving Allura in the last season finale. Here, they have proven that they are, at least, in fact, working against Zarkon, but Allura has quite a prejudice against them, in spite of this. The Galra have done any number of terrible things, and now she won't trust anyone affiliated with them, and that also comes full circle very soon. Ulaz is the Galra who got Shiro away from Zarkon, and as he introduces them to the concept of an ally faction of Galra against the Empire, Keith starts making connections. Every member of the Blade of Marmora has, well, a blade, made of Luxite, with this little insignia on it, and Keith has had one of these with him since he was a kid, with no idea where it came from. As you would expect when they finally meet the leader of Marmora, Colavan, he goes, "Hey Earthling, that's one of our blades, where did you get it from?" Keith doesn't know, and naturally he has a lot of questions, so he decides to take up this challenge to get answers. Now, this challenge results in a delusion of Keith's where he has to choose between answers to the questions about his heritage or saving the universe from Zarkon. Of course, he makes the right choice, saying he'll give up the blade because they don't have time to keep fighting, and then it activates and proves that he is of some Galra descent. Let's note here that Keith is saying no matter what he is, it doesn't change who he is, and at this point he looks willing to give up on finding answers for the sake of the greater good, because that's not going to stick around for too long. Also, the Red Lion is very attached to Keith, and in this episode we see for like the 4th time in the series, it jumps in to save him when he is in distress, because again, that's important. I think that Keith actually has the strongest bond to his lion. After this point, we get everybody coming to terms, with Keith being at least part Galra, and the only notable person who really has a problem with it is Allura, who gives him the cold shoulder for essentially the rest of the season. Keith still has questions, but now that we're allied with the Blades, he can put them aside while they try to figure out the all-important anti-Zarkon plan. Keith doesn't stop coming together as a character here, but this is the major takeaway. This is Keith! Now onto the second important plot point of this season, Zarkon being the previous paladin of the Black Lion and still possessing the Bayard. Again, this was an interesting plot twist implied to the audience at the end of the last season, and it makes for both one of the most interesting and most painful parts of the season. First, the good part. Shiro's conflict with Zarkon over who is the true paladin. There's this supposedly mystery bit where the residents of the Castle of Lions can't figure the heck out of how Zarkon keeps managing to track them, and the fact that it's so obvious to the people watching the show, it's just a little bit frustrating. Allura was thinking, "They're tracking me because I'm the Altean princess and my super magic is leading them to us," and Keith is like, "They're tracking me, maybe. I mean, what if Zarkon imprinted on me during our fight?" But we all know that he was actually thinking, "It's the knife, isn't it?" Or, "I'm like part Galra and that's what they're doing. That's how they're finding us." So anyway, these two run away, go on their own little space mission to see if Zarkon is tracking them, and when they manage to get stuck in space, and the Galra don't find them, and find the castle instead, guess what wasn't the problem? Also, this being another time the Red Lion autonomously found them so far away, everyone realized, oh, I guess Zarkon's connection to the Black Lion really could be how they're tracking us. Yes, finally. So after that, it's up to Shiro to combat Zarkon by deepening his bond with the Black Lion. Here, as he's doing this, we see the first instance of going into the infinite plane accessed by the Voltron Lions, and Shiro and Zarkon have a battle of wills and ideals, which Shiro wins, with will and ideals. That is how the Lion chooses him over Zarkon as Paladin, and let me tell you, if the Lion had not intervened, it would have been bad for Shiro, because the Lord of the Purple Thundercats was majorly kicking his butt. Unfortunately, all this is happening in the middle of an episode where everyone else is palling around the space mall, which is interesting and entertaining enough as it is, but having both things going on in the same episode just kind of splits attention. Some people like the funny parts more, some people like the Shiro versus Zarkon thing more. Flipping back and forth between the two is fine, but one or the other could have been nice too. I mean, later they do in fact do the thing where they have two different episodes that show the same time slot but from different characters' perspectives, so it's not like it's not an option or they didn't think about it. As Shiro bonds with the Black Lion, he also gets to see a bit into the history of the lions, including a bit of how they were made and seeing Zarkon working more or less as a good guy, it looks like. Shiro is like, wow, the Black Lion still has a lot of potential for me to unlock. I mean, look at those wings, I want those wings. After the incident where the lion has officially chosen its paladin, Zarkon has an increasingly difficult time reconnecting to it and locating it, because guess what? Shiro has the stronger bond now, but that doesn't deter Zarkon from trying over and over again anyway, and that's where things get messy. Zarkon is a bit of a letdown as a villain this season, for the exact same reason. Ever since he forced Voltron to fall apart during their first encounter, he has done nothing but obsess over the Black Lion. Like, it's ridiculous, both in and out of series. He's doing it so much that even Hagar is like, "My lord, don't you think that there are other more pressing matters at hand?" There are. I mean, they know. Zarkon knows that there is a spy on their ship sabotaging them, and Zarkon is like, "Hagar, take care of it. Let me get back to concentrating on getting my lion back." Nothing. Zarkon does squat beside repeatedly finding Voltron and losing sight of the castle again before he can take the lion. After it chooses Shiro, he never manages to locate them again, but he keeps trying anyway, and there's not a clash between them until the finale, just like last season. Like, Zarkon, we get it, you want your kitty back, but for crying out loud, there are other things that need your attention! Something that Chase has repeatedly stated to me is that it's the single-minded obsession with only the Black Lion that is the true detriment to Zarkon's character and status as a villain this season. The idea we got from Season 1 was that he just wanted Voltron so that it couldn't be used against him, knowing full well that it wouldn't work for him, but now we've turned that on its head and we're looking at a guy who really only wants the one lion. They don't even make it come across as something that's part of a bigger plan. You know, something like, if I can become the paladin of the Black Lion again, they won't be able to use Voltron against me because they will never be united. It's funny because that's such a basic plot you'd see from villains in older cartoons. I wouldn't be surprised if you told me keep the lions apart so that they can't form Voltron was one of however many schemes they had in the original Voltron show. It shouldn't matter which lion he has. Heck, he started out with the red lion on one of the Galra cruisers, and they had to bust it out in the first couple of episodes of the show so that they could form Voltron. We've seen it in this season, we'll see it later. The team is crippled without any one of the lions or paladins around to form Voltron in sticky situations. But is that the plan? Nope. I want my lion back, and that is that. What's the payoff? Not enough, that's what the payoff is. The first season has Zarkon as this looming figure in the background, not doing much other than giving orders, and then in the finale, he trounces a paladin in a Voltron lion single-handedly without breaking a sweat. We should have been able to see more of that in the second season so that we could keep up this established fact that Zarkon is a powerful and scary guy. Like, there's a reason he's the one ruling the whole universe, guys. Voltron and the crew shouldn't have had to keep running because they were scared of being tracked and attacked when they weren't ready, or at least not just for that reason. Zarkon himself should have felt like the threat they were running from, because unless they have Voltron and the lions, he could probably just board their ship and kill every last one of them by himself if he tried with minimum effort. That's pretty much what Ulaz did. But we don't get to see that. We just see him in what amounts to being the same scene over and over and over again, looking for the Black Lion specifically. When we finally reach the finale, and Zarkon can be bothered to leave the Druid Room where he's been squatting this whole season, he comes out in this absolutely menacing battle mech that has his face. They do mention this throughout the season. They mention this mech. They say it's armor built specifically for Zarkon to use, ideally to fight Voltron. It's never been successfully tested, but he wears it anyway, and we finally get to see him fight Voltron in all its glory. The Castle of Lions just unloads the most powerful blast it can at this mech, and Zarkon, he just diverts it. He just reflects it back at them and incapacitates the castle. Again, he manages to force Voltron out of Voltron form. He just forces the lions apart. This is not an easy fight for them. But of course, we get the whole Zarkon versus Shiro conflict, which again is good, and Shiro overcomes the odds and gets the Bayard back. But not in a fun way. I mean, it might have been cool to have another, stealth mission where Shiro has to hand-to-hand fight against Zarkon again just long enough to get the Bayard back and then book it back to the lions. But no. Rather, the lion goes, "Yo, Zarkon, I'm taking my paladin's weapon back." And with the Bayard, Shiro gets the awesome wings on the Black Lion, the team reforms Voltron, and they fight again. This time, in an epic standoff, they manage to stab Voltron's sword through the mech, but Zarkon counters with what I have to assume is some kind of magic. Then, the power of unity forms Voltron's ultimate epic flaming battle saber, and Zarkon's mech explodes! The explosion is otherworldly and causes the lions to disperse once more, and when they make their getaway, Zarkon is salvaged from the wreck of the mech, still alive but in no condition to fight, and Shiro is nowhere to be found. The Black Lion is intact, but the Paladin is missing. That's the payoff, and as a finale, it is solid, but Zarkon's prior obsession is distracting. It's not the battle itself that's a letdown, but the fact that the villain, with all his gravitas and power and intimidation, is just that. He's just the finale. But no, this is not the kind of trick that works twice in a row. They just had him as the finale in the last season, and that set a standard. The standard was, aw shoot, Zarkon himself is a problem, and we have to watch out for him. Not just his army, not just his empire that's constantly hounding us and trying to kill us, but we are not fully equipped to fight him at full power. We can't afford to run into him without a plan. But that's not what we got, and it's disappointing. Even a passive villain who sits back and gives orders most of the time can be a good villain, but gosh dang it, I want my darn lion back, is not the way to do it. I'm pretty sure this was just the writer's way of keeping Zarkon out of the Paladin's hair long enough to set up the finale. It's incredibly underwhelming, and that's where I think the season falls through the most. Okay, almost done. I'm just gonna go ahead and review the notes again. Allura being spacist against Galra is both understandable and annoying to a point. She and Keith had their own little space adventure together, and she just belts it out that the Galra are completely untrustworthy, and this makes him visibly uncomfortable. After all, he already has suspicions about his heritage and has been questioning whether or not there was a possibility of the Galra having been on Earth before. Even after seeing how dependable he is in this instance, Allura just acts colder than ice to him after finding out that he's part Galra. And her apology later to him doesn't come across as genuine. She says almost all of the right things, but her attitude up until that point doesn't reflect the conflicted feelings she supposedly has. Also, the way she phrases it is more like, I wanted to hate you because of your heritage, but couldn't because you're like family to me. Which is the exact opposite of what would have made this scene okay. I think, personally, that what she should have said was, I didn't want to hate you, but my prejudice got the better of me, even though you're like family to me, and apologize there. If in theory the thing that she actually said was true, and she was just acting cold to keep up a front that she hated everything that had to do with the Galra, even Keith, then Allura was just being super petty and was needlessly making him feel bad for something that was out of his control. There's this scene in the episode where they need to fix the wormhole machine, and Kuran has this Altean old person sickness that makes him slippery. As funny as this is, there's this scene where he's kind of ice skating around, and the slippery lines that show up on the floor are inconsistent between a couple of shots. There's not a lot of logic behind Allura thinking Zarkon is tracking her, but I'm gonna pin this on her being paranoid and wanting to take responsibility for anything she can, rather than her being vain about how important she is. Also, I want to know why Allura is one of the special Alteans who can activate the Teledove and Kuran can't, because apparently even millennia ago, only a few Alteans could actually do that. Hunk calling the little things inside of the Weblum bacteria things bugs me because even on a monster that big, bacteria would still be the same size they are anywhere else. Perhaps they are part of its internal ecosystem? Probably. I don't know if Slav is annoying or funny, but I know what all the paladins think. He does make Shiro mad, though, and that is a funny thing to see. Remember the Prison Break episode is where we start Lance's sharpshooter nickname that he gives to himself. Do all Galrin scars glow? The Blade of Marmora is going to have the highest death count of named characters, isn't it? I'm not going to keep track, though. It's probably just what they do. And when the gravity generator that is hiding the massive teledove goes down, Slav says there is no way in their reality that they will all survive, which has bigger implications than we originally thought looking back on it. Remember when I praised the show for anti-gravity physics? Well, the underwater physics are just as cool. I'm glad we established what a teledove is. That is, the thing that Allura feeds her space magic into that actually works to generate the wormholes they use to traverse the universe. In the Allura and Keith space adventure episode, we make a callback to the fact that Pidge souped up an engine in this particular space pod, and Karan said that they might make it explode if they used it. 'Cause guess how they got stranded in space? I really do like the Space Mall episode. It's a lot of fun, even when it's diverting attention from one of the more interesting conflicts. The bathrooms, the food court, the Earth Store, Varkon, and this little bit at the beginning where Lance asks Allura if he'd like her to bring back something from the swap moon. He asks, how about I bring you back something sparkly? And then when Karan tells Allura she's not allowed to go, she's like, but I'd like something sparkly. We have to remember this. This is just important details to remember. Also, they now have a cow. When explaining the big plan to beat Zarkon, Lance makes another callback to the I'll form the head bit from the original 80s Voltron. I don't know why it is that Hunk and Keith were sent to get the Skulltrite from the Weblum as the ideal team, but I think their dynamic is great, and I'm glad we got an episode with the two of them. Hunk grilling Keith about the whole Galra thing is really funny, and Keith saying, "Stop looking at me like you expect me to turn purple at any minute," is really funny. Can we get Keith space puberty, please? We all wanted to see purple Keith at some point, didn't we? Ancient Altean Weblum Tracker, TM. The Weblum itself is actually kind of cheaply animated, but it's a really big thing, so I guess I can see why. I haven't spotted the Mandalorian symbol at all in this season. Hi Aksha, bye Aksha, see you in the Lotor part. While it would be cool to see a new Balmera, it does make sense for them to go back to the old one, where they have their friends for the sake of being easy, but why the heck is this giant crystal here? I guess this crystal just wasn't enough to keep the darn thing alive on its own, even though it was protecting it? Also, why did we have to send just Hunk and Keith in the yellow line to the Weblum? Why not have the red one out there too? I mean, for the other group it makes sense just to have one, but this becomes a problem later. I don't think the Robeast is just gonna sit around and wait for us to transform. You'd be surprised. I mean, did that ever stop the magical girls? There are a couple of moments this season that feature some heartfelt exchanges between Allura and Karan, and I feel this is needed to help keep in mind that they have a father-daughter-like relationship. You realize that once Zarkon is defeated, the universe won't need Voltron. Oh, Shiro, have I got news for you. Also, now that Shiro has the complete bond with the Black Lion, he's taking on an entire fleet by himself in that lion, and it is really awesome. I also noted that the music from one Voltron transformation to another is not always exactly the same. They shift some stuff around. We did manage to explain and take out the giant quintessence sucking machine that Zarkon had Hagar create. Wow, you know what? We've barely mentioned quintessence at all this season, and I'll take that as a blessing for now. And that's it. I think I said everything I wanted to say about Seasons 1 and 2 of Voltron Legendary Defender. Boy, oh boy, this is a lot longer than I thought it would be. Good lord, I'm glad I decided not to put all 8 seasons in one video, or this might never have gotten done. Thank you, people of Earth and elsewhere, if you managed to slog through this whole thing and are now watching the outro. You are troopers, and I don't plan on keeping you here any longer. If you like this video, press that button, and I hope to see you in part 2 if and when it comes out. You can subscribe and hit the bell if you want to be notified when that happens. Find the art and other links in the description as always, and feel free to let me know what you think about Netflix Voltron and what I've said about it in the comments. Whether you agree or disagree, we can start some fun conversations. That's it, peeps. This video has been long, and I have to crash now. 13 pages, this was exhausting, but I think it was worth it. Part 2 never. Ciao!
Summon Prince Lotor.
Oh, fine. Fine. We'll do the Lotar part. We'll do a really, really long talk about Lotor.